All right. So, what we're going to talk today. We'll start with a question. What is the economy? This is a word that appears almost everywhere. Everybody talks about the economy. We are concerned, we are worried, this and that. But what is it? So, is the economy a cat? Is the economy an elephant? Is it a clown? Is it currency? What we call money? Or is it the piggy bank? What we call savings? Now, if you approach a topic, the first thing you want to do is to decompose the topic into its smallest constituents, smallest parts. And if you ask, for example, the physicist, about matter, about what the universe is made of, the physicist would tell you it's made of atoms. And atoms are made of smaller particles, that at least three type of particles, proton, neutrons in the center, and electrons rotating around it. But I mean, this is just a model. I always have to say that this is just a model and not the reality. We also say that these little particles inside, they have smallest particle, and we go ahead until we find the smallest of the smallest of the smallest. Now, my question is, what is the smallest part of the economy? When you ask this question, most people say it's offer and demand. That's the basis of the economy. So, but in physics, we always talk about the smallest part that combine to form larger structure. Now, offer and demand, it's not really satisfying to understand what the economy smallest part is, because offer and demand is already on a larger scale. You have offer and demand for complex economical system. You have a demand for oil in the United States, and they offer for oil in Saudi Arabia. And that's not small. It's an operation of billions and billions and billions of dollars. So what would be then the smallest part that we can identify in an economical process? Here you have a buyer and a seller. You might say, yeah, in that case, the example I made before about offer and demand, you might say, well, in that case, the seller would be Saudi Arabia and the buyer would be United States. Yes, and that's also how this is depicted in the image. You have someone using currency to buy some other things that here in the image you can see boxes with merchandise, commodities, objects, stocks. But all these things belongs to different categories. But if you want to see this in its smallest conceptual part, you would say that what is happening here is a transaction. So the transaction is the minimal unit of the economy. You cannot go lower. There is nothing before transaction. Every economical interaction is based on a transaction. Here the transaction is between currency and whatever object the seller is offering. Whenever you, and this works to explain the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States in the case of oil that we made, but also it works to explain the relationship of a kid going to buy a chewing gum. He goes there with his little dollar, 50 cents, and he gets chewing gum, but what he's doing is participating in a economical transaction, the minimal conceptual unit of the economy. This minimal conceptual unit defines what is called a dyadic relationship. Meaning, dyadic is a relation based on two subjects. Of course, in the economy you can have wider relations based on many more subjects. But we are interested to find what are the basic components. And the basic transaction is based on at the beginning, on a dyadic relation. And you might be surprised how many, or that large part of any transactions are dyadic. Being the subject a person, you go and buying chewing gum, or you go buy a car, or you go buying whatever, or a company, a legal subject buying. Of course, you might say the company's could be multiple subject, but in that sense, in the legal term, is one subject performing one operation. So it's still a dyadic relation. It's very rare the case of transactions that are based on multiple subjects. And you can see that from your own experience in life, in what you see. Now, what happens in these transactions, in these economical transactions? You transact something A for something B, being one for the other. Because in modern economies, we are used to say that the transaction is always between commodities and currency. But it's not always the case. There are the previous stage of economy, for example, well, a barter is the basic for transactions. And it works. If you use the concept of transaction, you will see that if I give you 2 goats for one camel, the transaction still exists even if there is no currency in place, no currency exchange. Now, but for us, we have classes of things that we call with specific names. Commodities is one of the most important names. What are commodities? Now, the definition would say that a commodity is a raw material or primary agricultural product that can be bought and sold. You can say, for extension, is a class of economic goods. As you can see in the image, it's pretty explanatory. You see oil, you see gold, you see silver, you see steel, you see corn. Those are all commodities. They are things that in their nature, in their application, they are completely, entirely distant and different. But for the economy, they are all under the hat of commodities. So you can see here, this is a rough map of what commodities are, or where commodities are coming. Of course, as I said, it's extremely raw, but it defines in a certain way, it shows that some countries, for example, have a certain type of dominant commodity that it's more important for the rest of the world. We made, for example, the example of oil, and that will bring you to Saudi Arabia or to Libya, to Algeria. Now, in this schematic, you can see already a model for a lot of economical transactions. If you want to have precious stones and you want to exchange that for transport equipment, you can make an agreement between India and Brazil, for example. Or you can use, again, currency to buy any of those. Or you can use the currency to buy any of those and then get the oil to China and turn that into electronic equipment and sell that. Anyway, the idea is clear. But this is a map that shows a distribution of commodities per geographical areas. Now, if you take the case of single states, like New Jersey, for example. In New Jersey, you have 5 top agricultural commodities, which means these are the most traded commodities for New Jersey, and you see they're also based mostly on the territory, because some products might grow here, not elsewhere. If you would have the same map for California, for example, you would have grapes and wine somewhere in there. So through the commodities, you can also understand and define the structure of the area. Now, how do this reality of things, of commodities, of products, looks on the financial market? This is, for example, a table of commodities and how they are exchanged in different markets for different exchanges. You see each name represent a specific exchange, the Chicago Mercantile, the Euronext, etc., etc. You will have the commodity, what we saw before, milk, wheat, soybean, oats, corn, etc., traded on a specific exchange for a specific contract size, which means you cannot go to the exchange. Let's say you produce milk and you want to go to the CME and say, okay, I have here 1,000 gallons of 100 gallons of milk. Can I trade with you? That's not the way it works. You need to have a contract, meaning you have to have a specific amount of milk, which is minimum of 200,000 lips, that you can trade at that moment. Usually they are time trades because they are very time sensitive, considering that commodities can expire pretty fast. So these trades have to be very fast. So when the farmer has this contract available, this will be turned into a financial, this material, this commodity, this merchandise, suddenly becomes a contract, a financial contract. So I can go to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and say, I want 5 contracts of milk, of DC, traded, and I want them delivered on markets. Change can indicate, so this contract, usually one of the part of the contract is the delivery where this can be delivered, because it's relevant. If I buy a contract, a DC contract in India for a customer in Ohio, it doesn't make any sense because I would have to bring the fresh milk from India to Ohio. So those are all factors. But what is interesting for us here is to see how the material, the commodity, gets turned into a financial contract through the market. Now, this is valid for many other things, like industrial metals, for example. Same thing. You have here, we know that metals are extremely important for production. So you have zinc, copper, lead, aluminum, etc., exchanged on a different exchange. In this case, unit is, in all cases, metric tons, and the currency is USD. So again, the same story. You want to buy 10 metric tons of copper, you go to the LME, you buy in USD, and you get delivered where it's specified in the contract. But what we are seeing here is all financial contracts, meaning a transaction that is based on a financial agreement between you, buyer, and the seller through a mediator that is the main exchange, the exchange. Same thing we saw metals is for precious metals, although we are not going into details because precious metals might require a longer analysis, but same thing, you have different main exchange currency unit, which in this case the minimal amount for exchange for a unit of gold is a troy ounce, about 33 grams. You can have different units. Good delivery, for example, is the unit of exchange preferred by central banks, which is a big bar of gold. But you can also have commodities like energy. Energy, not in energy as electricity, is also a commodity. But in this case, we have defined as commodities what can produce energy. Propane, oil, ethanol, natural gas, etc. Same story, you have the product, the commodity somewhere, you have the contract, the definition of the contract size of each commodity per each market with a symbol. It's pretty simple in its structure. But again, you have the same structure as we described before. Buyer, seller, transaction through the exchange. Then, of course, there are commissions, etc. You can also have livestock, which are also a commodity. You see how everything that is part of the economy can be seen as an exchange of commodities. Here you have live cattle, for example. And even for live cattle, you have a contract size, a currency, and an exchange, and of course a symbol. So you can use this to exchange. I need, for example, 20 tons of live cattle, whatever type of animals is that. I go to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, I buy this contract, and I will have delivered that amount at a specific place. Now, we saw a very nice or systematic description of this, but how do they look in the real life? Is like this. You will see that for each, this is the exchange that we were talking about, we have a deeper spectrum of what happens to these contracts. Because you see, I have a spot price, which is the price that I will pay, or you will pay, or whoever will pay for that contract at that specific moment. But I also have prices for different year, for different quarters, and as you can see, this is energy, meaning this is oil, Brent, dollar per barrel, but we can also have agriculture, metals, all the commodity. They look like that to those who wants to buy these commodities, who want to participate in the transactions in the market. Now, commodities are just one of what in the finance are called asset classes. Now, the first asset classes that you can imagine, that you know, it's cash. In English, there's even the expression cash is king. Now, the order here is not really, it's not really in order. We would say cash is the first, commodities is the second, real estate is the third, fixed income and stocks are fourth and fifth. What do we see here in this little summary? If we start thinking about what we have in front of us, we can already notice something we discussed before. A difference, or a connection, a relationship between the economy and the finance. Of course, we just discussed how economical goods, commodities, physical goods, can be turned into financial contracts. And that's already a bridge between the economy and finance. But these are things that I can, let's say, hold in my hand. I can hold in my hand an ounce of copper, of gold, of silver. Of course, electricity might be a little bit complicated, or gas, but I can keep that in somewhere. I can have gas stored. I can have electricity stored. Real estate is the same thing. You can touch a house. You can see where the house is. You cannot see, you cannot touch, you cannot really hold a financial contract on your house like your mortgage. Your mortgage is a cash liability, but it's not physical in its form. It's a contract. A contract is not, of course, there's a piece of paper saying, I agree thereby to do this and that, but it's a piece of paper. The contract is not the house. The house is not the contract. While the gold is the gold. The oil is the oil. But the contract over oil is not the oil. The contract over gold is not the gold. And that's exactly the jump between economy and finance. Now, asset classes, when we talk about asset classes, we enter in a jungle of different products. Because, as we saw in the previous slides, asset classes can be divided into debt, real estate, equity, commodities again, funds. You can classify them in several ways. One of the usual ways to classify them according to risk. You have risky, safe, medium, etc. We are not going too much into this. So, one of the ways that finance evaluate asset classes, you see that here we are already on a higher level of abstraction. This is also one more difference, one more element that differentiates finance from the economy, the abstraction. The economy is usually not that abstract. The economy, you have to imagine something like going to the market and buying X for Y. You buy beans for dollars. You buy rice for dollars. So it's a one product exchange for a currency. But you can, in different markets, you can also, again, go with beans and exchange that for rice. So commodity per commodity. It's pretty real. It's pretty tangible. It's something you have in your hands. Well, when you think of finance, you have to think about something like, a casino, where you go there, you convert your currency into the chips, and the chips are somehow a contract that you're going to gamble, that you're going to play in the casinos. But there is the reality of the object of the thing is lost or gets substituted by a higher level of abstraction. Now, asset classes are usually evaluated according to, as we said, risk. So, you see, this is the triangle. You have the risk over here, and you have the return over here. At this point, you have a low risk. At this point, you have high return, high risk. This is one of the abstractions to calculate your investment in the financial markets. Now, when you break down the economy, you can say that the economy entails all the activity related to production, consumption, and trade of goods and services in an area. But today, an area could mean the entire planet. Now, if you want it or not, an economical system is a system that applies to everyone, from individuals to entities, through a complex social model where the government is included, the law is included, etc., etc. Now, when you look at the economy of in a specific region, you will see that so many factors influences this economy. Here it's listed culture, laws, history, geography. Think of, even in the financial markets, there are some indexes. There's a Sharia index, for example, where there are not traded products that are contrary to the ideology of the Islam. So live hogs would not be part of this portfolio of this index. So culture influences heavily the economies. The best story I have, the most brilliant economical idea I know, is actually based on a cultural difference. There was a guy in Turkey, the country, that noticed that this producer of poultry used to cut the legs, the chicken legs, and throw them out because nobody wanted to eat them. So he figured that this was a cost for the producer of chicken, because it was biological material. He had to be they had to do. You cannot just throw that in the trash. So he had extra cost because of that. So he went to this company and said, "I'll take care of all the chicken the legs that you have to throw away. But you will have a contract with me for 10 years, and I'm not going to ask you anything." The company was at the beginning a little bit perplexed, because they said, "But this guy, what's in it for him? I mean, he's taking a cost from us without getting nothing in exchange." But they couldn't figure it out. So at the end, they had the legal counsel checking this contract, checking the situation, if there was any downside for them, and they realized that it was okay to enter in a 10 years contract with this guy. Actually wanted more, but the company said 10 years is a reasonable time. So what the guy did, he collected these parts of the chicken that are unedible for people in Turkey, and put that on a train and sent to China, where it's actually a delicatessen, a very good food. So basically, the company was producing for him at zero cost. The only cost he had was to ship this item, and he made plenty of money using here, of course, some intelligence, some strategy, but the cultural differences between the two countries. In one country that was unedible, in the other country was pretty much loved. Now, economies, we already mentioned barter economy, are not a apart from not being two economies the same, are very different in their nature. You have market-based economies, for example. Everybody's familiar with this term in the United States. Allows goods to go freely through the market, etc., etc. But there are other systems like planned economies that are depending on a central political agent which controls the price and distribution of goods. Mixed economy, which is mostly modern, advanced Western economies are mixed economy, a hybrid that blends some aspects of both market and planned economies, which means the government has something to say about the economy, and the economy should not have something to say about the market, but that's usually, unfortunately, not always the case. And traditional economy is a term that economists tend to apply for older economic systems. And then we have barter economy, and that we mention shortly, and a few others. Now, what is then the economy? I hope you are not confused at this point about what is it. But from a different perspective, and now we go into the scientific part, into the physics aspect, I would say the economy, which in a well-balanced system contains the finance and not vice versa, because one of the big problems we are facing today is that the finance contains the economy and not vice versa, and that's a problem. This is when you have this imbalance between the market, the finance, and the economy, you have a lot of problems and potentially reasons for crashes. Anyway, the economy is a complex system. What is a complex system? A complex system always is a structure that contains multiple elements that express complex behavior. Let's see an example. You would say this is a complex system, for example. Now, I don't know if you can see that well, but this complex system, without any question, complex system relates to obesity influence. So all these factors, all these characters, from the individual psychology to social psychology to individual activity to activity in environment, food consumption, etc., determine the energy balance that determine the obesity or not of a person. Now, why I took this example, you see, you have factors like individual psychology, physiology, etc., etc. Now, this is extremely complex system, and indicates only one person, one factor that leads to obesity or not. Try to imagine a financial complex system that contains subset of complex systems that creates a map of complexity. Now, all the relationship, all the transaction at the end of this complex system, that's why we introduced the concept of transaction. at the basis of this complex system, there are always transactions. You have to imagine, if you could use your imagination and look at this in like it's in real time, this would be an incredibly bright structure that would all the time have minuscule points lighting up, pop, 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 everywhere, one after another, multiplying, incredibly big. And those would be the transaction that creates all this wire of relationship, because from the minor transaction, like we said, you going buying the chewing gum, to the transactions on the stock market, to the exchange of contracts. And this would be a pulsing, lightning, constantly moving, constantly expanding, shrinking, squeezing system that represents the financial complex system. You see also complex systems around. A swarming of birds is a complex system. In this case, you are one of these birds swarming in these complex systems of the finance/economy. Now, in Latin, there is a saying, pars pro toto, which means a part taken for the whole. In this analysis of the economy and the relationship that the economy entertains with finance, we tend often, unfortunately, even in big theory, to forget that there is always the little part, the part who is responsible for the transaction, is the citizen, is the human being, is the person that should be actually the key center of economical system. The word economy per se comes from the word oikos, which means house. Unfortunately, when you get lost in the abstractions of the finance, you forget that the economy should serve the individual. And as Einstein once brilliantly said, of course I already said Einstein, I need to add brilliantly, I'm sorry for that repetition, everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. I hope I've not made the mistake to make this explanation simpler as it should be. Thank you.